All right. So hello and welcome to the fourth event in the 2023 Hudson Valley Farming Webinar and Field Day Series, Farming in a Changing Climate. My name is Jenna Walzak, and I am an Ag Climate Resiliency Specialist on the CCE Harvest New York team. I just want to take a moment to thank all the partners who have helped to put this series together, including New York Soil Health, the Ulster County Soil and Water Conservation District, Orange County Soil and Water Conservation District, Glenwood, New York State Ag and Markets, New York State Soil and Water Conservation Committee, and CCE Ulster County, Orange County, Columbia and Greene counties, and the CCE Harvest New York team. Just a few housekeeping notes before today's presentation. Please make sure you are on mute, and please feel free to put any questions you might have in the chat to be answered at the end of the presentation. Today, we have Jake Wedemeyer with Ulster County Soil and Water Conservation District, where he is the executive director, along with Travis Ferry, who is a district technician at Ulster County Soil and Water Conservation District. And they will be talking about the concept and the practice of rotational grazing. So with that, Jake, the floor is yours.
Hi, welcome everybody. Good afternoon. Hope you had your lunch, or you can eat your lunch during this. So I'll do most of the talking because before Travis came here, I actually did the design, did the construction inspection of this particular rotational grazing system. But we do that when we work with a farmer. They work through the Agricultural Environmental Management Program, AAM. It's a tiered approach with a conservation plan. And for you farmers, when you work with the district and you give us personal information, such as a telephone number and an address and what you do and how you manage your farm, that is confidential by New York state law. And the idea behind that is, back in the day, the DEC wanted to regulate farms in New York State. And since this is a voluntary program, we managed at the state legislative level to convince the DEC that if a farmer has a resource concern, they come to us voluntarily. It is confidential, and then we apply for cost share dollars to assist farmers with conservation practices. Okay, so we're not distracting Margaret. Would you mind closing the door? Thank you. So, okay, let's get started. So anybody have any questions? Feel free to put them in the chat box or towards the end. I could talk because I can't read and type at the same time. Anyway, so rotational grazing in Ulster County. Brett was going to join us today, but he had to work. So we designed these systems for people that farm full-time, part-time, based on how often the cows are rotated is based on the farmer's management. So the maximum duration would be 7 days for rotation, right? For high intensity rotational grazing. So we originally planned Brett's farm to do 7 days, but once we put in the perimeter fence, right, that was 4-strand high tensile. Okay, he's usually moving them. His management has improved just with the perimeter fence. So he's moving cattle every 3 to 4 days versus 7 days. So before the perimeter fence was put in, he was setting up temporary fence, and he was doing it on a 5 to 6 day schedule. And with the permanent perimeter fence, he's able to run one wire quickly versus the netted fence. And that setup takes him 20 minutes to 25 minutes. So once you do rotational grazing, you develop a system, right? It's not just fence in a 30-acre pasture. It's a system that consists of the fence, that perimeter, that's the foundation, as well as a watering system, okay? And the thing is, you could improve the farmer's management by giving them a good water system, which entails a water line. You need to work through how many hydrants they need. We use frost-free hydrants. And so we put in 6 frost-free hydrants and actually we worked on he built a sled with minerals. We'll get to this later, with a ball waterer. So he moves the ball waterer every couple days with the herd. So again, probably 25 minutes to move them. So the management has improved. So we'll go through the slides here. But the fence installation, the farmer could do it themselves. This is a fencing contractor, Pro Fence out of Pennsylvania, and they had the best price. These two people did 6,606 feet in 2 days. That includes all the gates, all the corner posts, right? And then just even putting in a gate, you have to run a hot wire underneath the gate so it connects. So there's 4 strands high tensile, and then 2 strands are electrified and 2 strands are grounded. So this is the conduit for the fence. It's buried underground. Again, they did a really good job doing this. That's the hot wire, right? Here's the machine. So they put the fence posts in first, and then they run the wire. So you see 1, 2, 3, 4 spools. There's 5 spools on this because with cattle, 4 is, you want 3 strands minimum. 4 strands is the Cadillac. If you're doing sheep, you want that lower strand, okay? Or pigs if they're adults, but they have a really good setup. This company where they did the posts one day and then they put the wire up the second day and the gates. We use pressure treated posts, but you could use cedar or locust. Locust is all natural. And cedar, so the pressure treated, they should last probably about 20 years. But locust is king, okay? But it's hard to come by, FYI, all right? So cedar, the pressure treated is most cost effective. After that would be cedar. And then third, it's most expensive, but it's really durable, locust. So some farmers, they have their own post pounder. But again, if you decide to hire out these companies, fence installation companies, they come with their own rigs and they're in and out. So they had a rock auger and fence pounding machine. So the auger, they would auger in the hole first if it was rocky for a pilot hole, and then they set the post up and then they pound it in. This is a pretty big rig here. So again, it's in our specifications. It's not rocket science, but these corner braces are put in because when you have a corner, there's a lot of tension, okay? So it's braced to keep the center post from moving inward, So the bracing's important because cattle know if a fence is down. They could sense like if the electric's off with their nose, right? So the corner braces are important for fence durability and longevity and keeping livestock in. It keeps them safe and it keeps the public safe. But again, like we're looking at 4 strands, what we recommend is the bottom strand, make that into a ground wire. The middle strand, have that live. The second strand from the top, make that a ground wire. There's no electricity going through it. And then the top strand have electricity going through it. So if you're doing your own electric fence for rotational grazing, right, you want at least 3 strands, okay? But I'm telling you that the inexpensive way to do it to keep livestock in, even if you did 2 strands, but what you really want during the wintertime, that bottom strand should not have electricity, right? Because the snow is going to ground it out, right? Number 2, even if all 3 or 4 strands have electricity going through them, the snow acts as an insulator. So if a cow's standing on the snow with their hooves, they could touch all 4 wires and not receive a shock. if they're standing on the snow with their hooves and they touch a non-live wire and a live wire, they'll get that jolt, right? And they'll figure that out very easily, particularly young stock, what they could get away with, okay? So with electric, it's mainly psychological, okay? They know not to go through it. And if you're raising, whether it's dairy or beef, you want to train them not to touch it, to stay away from it, okay? But again, they'll start to figure it out during the winter months, what they can get away with. So you want one not live and one live, and you want the bottom wire not to have electricity going through it, okay? So another thing, part of this project, like you could see like the bare soil areas, right? And bare soil. So like part of our AAM program, part of the farmers in kind was to do obstruction removal. And that's just a fancy term for clearing along the tree line. Like Brett spent a lot of time removing trees that were leaning, removing stumps, and just making sure he maximized the acreage. So he spent literally weeks clearing out the tree line. So when you install this, you could have older trees that, are kind of at the end of their lifespan, or dead trees or obstructions. So he did the obstruction removal, made sure there were no leaning trees over the fence line, the proposed fence line. He put about 2 weeks into this, did a lot of grading with the dozer. So when the fencing crew came in, it was easy for them to navigate and install the system, or install the fence. Here's another picture of the conduit buried underneath. Again, that's why it's nice to have a company. They have a little mini excavator, so they bury that conduit into the ground, into a trench, from fence post to fence post where gates are installed. So when you plan out your grazing system, you got to plan for a couple things. Where do you want your gates? So as you're building it, plan out your gates. And also, livestock need water. Where do you want to put your watering system? Okay. So this is in the rockier portion of the farm. And again, it didn't take them long to do, but they had the right equipment. Okay. That's quite a machine. It came on a tractor trailer, everything that they needed. So that, again, 2 people, pro fence out of Pennsylvania. They seem to be the most reasonable in the area. They come up, 2 men in and out, 2 to 3 days. So they had this little machine that pulls the fence wire. Again, it's high tensile. I got to find a picture of the insulators. They use these rubber insulators that are stapled. Okay. Again, this is all, you could see where the wood is piled. That's all the woody debris that, Brett was burning it as he went, but this is his pasture. So when you see grass like this, you turn the cows out. And part of it too, his stand is really good, is that he clips at least twice a year. So when they're done grazing, when he goes, he'll actually clip everything that's been grazed. And then when the cows go back, the cattle go back into areas like this, it's typically on a 40-day rotation schedule. Okay. So the 2 main things, like what we did was we did a rotational grazing plan, and I'm going to just put this on the screen. Hold on a minute, if I could do it. Hold on a minute. All right. So we did a rotational grazing plan. And so it's good to actually figure out how many head that they have. So basically, we're describing current farm status and goals, right? And what we wanted to do is compare animal density and grazing area duration to maximize rotational grazing and to reduce hay production, all right? So that really helps with climate resilience, okay? Where you have good pasture stands, right? They're receiving manure and urine from grazing, right? There's clipping involved to reduce weed growth. And the more acres that can be pastured effectively and intensively, there's less hay production to really worry about or more hay to sell off the farm. So last year we had severe drought conditions. And because of this rotational grazing system, Brett was able to graze probably an additional 35 days, which really helped him. And if we had a normal growing season with precipitation, he could have grazed up until December, but he had to stop in early November. So the thing is, part of this plan, and we do this, is that, all right, what kind of animal? It's beef, and you do an average weight, which is very important, okay? And then you have to know what the primary grass species is. And, in where we live, it's orchard grass, older cultivars, right? And that orchard grass tends to grow robustly in the early spring. Timothy's behind it, the same as brome, but it's mainly orchard grass and Timothy. And again, these pastures were in poor condition. They're full of multiflora rose, barberry, and Brett really brought them back just with mechanically just mowing them, brush hogging them over and over again. Then he put his herd on it, and then he rotated them and clipped after each rotation. Same thing, we look at the hay species, okay? But what's very important is you have to look at soil type, right? There's like Schoharie and Martin and Odessa, and we have to calculate the acreage. And then we looked at the old soil survey. That's very good in terms of animal units on land and also forage production. You could also get that off the USDA soil web survey. So your forage yield in tons per acre gives you a good idea how you could stock the land. So the better the soil, the better the forage yield. And total acres available, that's 36.6. And again, you try to have one animal unit, which is 1,000 pounds for 2 acres. So one cow, right? Or with a beefer, it's about 800 pounds, but you want about 2 acres per head just to give you a little buffer, especially during a drought period. When they ask you a whole bunch of questions, I don't want to get into it too much, but total acres that can be harvested mechanically, that's 100% of that pasture. So instead of, mowing it and raking it and baling it, if it's wet hay, they just mow it and bale it. But instead of mowing it, tedding it, raking it, baling it, storing it, moving it, instead of harvesting it and using fuel, let the cows do the work, okay? So we have to go through a lot of, this is 16 pages of what's going on and what we're going to improve, right? And then we looked at the animal weight, they're non-lactating. And then you're looking at pounds of dry matter per head a day, that's 20 pounds. Number of animals, this is the forage demand. So we're really just not winging it. We're actually looking at what the cows need and what the acreage is able to support. So before we're going to use public funding to pay for a rotational grazing system, we want to make sure that the farmer has enough acreage and he has the animal units, not too many. Like, we don't want to support a feedlot. We want to make sure the system works. So again, the residency period, I know he works, so we figured 7 days. So every 7 days he could move his cattle. But because the system works so well, just the time it takes to move the cattle, set up one wire, move the watering system, he's doing it every 3 to 4 days. So again, go through the numbers here. And then it tells you how many paddocks you need for 7 days. Every 7 days you're going to move them, and you need roughly 5 setups, right? And then the number of acres needed, minimum, so there's a whole bunch of calculations you do. But actually, the system's working really well for 24 head, okay? So he has about 30 acres, he has 24 head. They vary in size, some are calves, some weigh 1,200 pounds, but it does work well. So again, I can't emphasize enough the corner bracing here, okay? They did a very good job. And again, you could see the insulators too, right? You could see those little cylindrical insulators, and they work well. If they're too short, or if they're not wide enough, water could get in and short it out against the post. So they are the right length, okay? Because if there's surface tension on the post during rain, that water could cling to the post and the wire inside the insulator. I've seen that happen. So this company did a really good job. And again, you could see where Brett did a lot of clearing before the fence was installed. So you see the wood piles on the left, that was all the, there were trees and limbs hanging along the tree line. So he was proactive in making sure that any dead branches he clipped. And again, that was part of his cost share obstruction removal. He did all the site work prior to the company coming, okay? A lot of hours. So again, that was a success. So again, this is a system, rotational grazing system. One part of the system is fence, right? The appropriate amount of acres based on animal numbers. The other aspect of the system is the watering system. And what I found is that from experience and my own experience in working with farmers, having a very good system that's buried, it really helps in terms of efficiency. So, and also water usage. So farmers would have a water line over the ground, and that's pretty temporary, but over time they have to move it, right? Whether it's PVC or garden hose or fire hose, I've seen it all, but those systems, you have to move them physically. They're prone to leaking over time. You know, the pipe gets worn out or damaged, or cattle walking over it. So we like to bury the system. So again, this is like the photos you have I provided to Jenna, and then Jenna made a PowerPoint out of what I did. Thank you very much, made my life easier. But when we install a system, right, this is 1-inch water line, and you could see there's a T, right? So this is the main line going from the upper right to the lower left, and then there's a T, so it branches off to another paddock system. So everything, if you decide to do this on your own or with cost share funding, each connection has 2 stainless steel hose clamps, okay? That's just double protection to make sure that this is a weak link in the system. So if you double clamp it, okay, that's one less thing to worry about. It's cheap insurance. So if it costs an extra $5 to $7, right, per connection or per T, that's just insurance. And then Brett had them marked off, so in case there was ever a leak, he knows where these T's are if he has to do a repair. And I doubt he'll need a repair. So we did the water line after the fence installation. And again, it's just finding, I like to do it beforehand, but the good thing is if you put your posts in and then put your water line in, you don't have to worry about remembering where the line is when the posts are installed. But these posts are in, I think they're in about 4.5, they're in about 3 feet, these posts. And the water line, this is pretty easy. It's down 4 feet. Okay. So we use 4 feet because it'll never freeze, okay? So when they're digging, they literally have a mark on the boom on their excavator, and they just dig down the 4 feet and call it good. And then I take shots to make sure everything's at 4 feet. I'm just documenting everything because it's public money. So if it's a little deeper, it doesn't matter. But, again, this is what I did. I just measured every 50 feet to see it was 4 feet. And so frost-free hydrant, you want gravel around around where the outlet is. So what a frost-free hydrant is, there's a valve, you open up the valve, and it's pressurized, and you could connect it to a garden hose, to a watering trough, or a ball waterer. Once that valve's shut off, all the water in that vertical pipe drains down under to 4 feet to ensure it doesn't freeze, okay? And they're about $165 a piece. So again, this is the end of the main line, and there's a frost-free hydrant at the end. Again, water line connection, Brett flagged that off. He's worried about, oh, what if I need to maintain it? He's a good, he manages his systems very well. But again, everything is double clamped, okay? So when he was putting that together, the pipe was clean, and he put the connection in, and he double clamped it, and you bury it, and you don't have to worry about it. And then he took it an extra step further. He put gravel around it just to envelope that, but he didn't have to do that. So every connection double clamped. So there's Mr. Fox here, putting in the frost-free hydrant, okay? And again, there's gravel around the base. So that valve's up here, right? There's a valve here and there's a valve down here. Once there's pressure, once he closes that hydrant, the water drains down into the gravel, okay? So he literally put number 2 stone. That's 3/4 inch stone, right? It doesn't lock in. It's good for it's good. It lets water pass. So there's probably about a foot of number 2 stone around the outlet, or the drainage outlet, right? Once it dumps. So when you close the valve on the frost-free hydrant, it dumps the pressure down into the ground, into the gravel, okay? And then there's the backfilling, okay? So no big deal. That's the fun part. The job is done. And the nice thing about that is just get it backfilled. We're doing that in November. We're just trying to meet the grant deadline. And then he overseeded it and put mulch over this, all disturbed areas. And again, the cows are grazing on this now. But he gave it about 2 months for it to establish. So since he had his perimeter fence, he wanted the grass to establish. He just kept the cows off the areas where there were soil disturbance because of the water line installation. So 2121 means 2,121 feet. So I had a measuring wheel. So that's how we do it. The engineers like to see it. And again, this was a design system. We worked with the NRCS. So us district folks, since we have a partnership with the NRCS, they provide engineering support. We worked with Lori Beach. She's out of Ithaca. She's fantastic. I think she just has too much on her plate. She helps everybody out. But we went through the calculations to make sure the system worked. So that would basically be, we look at well yield, right? How viable is the well? So we want at least 10 gallons per minute from that well. So Brett and I did that. And then we also have to size a pressure tank. So he had a little pressure tank in his old house, and he's building his new house next door. So we went from a 30-gallon pressure tank to an 80-gallon pressure tank. So it'd have enough volume in the tank and enough pressure. I forgot what the pressure was, the volume and pressure to ratio, but he's pushing, 2,100 feet of water through a 1-inch water line. Plus he has a wife and 2 kids. So during the summer, that's when there's peak demand, okay? So in the summertime, like a beef cow will drink up to 25 gallons a day. Okay. So you times that times 24, right? And that's peak demand in the summertime. Plus, people are taking showers, doing wash, running the dishwasher. So he's using his domestic well with a bigger pressure tank, 80 gallons, and he's supplying his cattle and running his household off of that. So we did the calculations to make sure the watering system worked for dual use. And there's also a backflow preventer valve. So any water that goes into the water line, it won't backflow back into the pressure tank or into their well. So this is one of the spurs. So before we bury it, we want to pressure up the line. This is the fun stuff. So the line was pressurized, the trench was open, we checked for any leaks, and we want to make sure there was enough pressure at the end of the line, okay? And that, I was there and there was enough pressure. So I wish I had a photo. Okay. So that frost-free hydrant is hooked up to a 5/8 a 5/8 garden hose. And then that garden hose goes to a ball waterer, right? And there's two balls, and the cow touches the ball, presses down the ball with its nose and drinks, all right? Now, a cow doesn't drink like a cat or a dog. They actually suck the water. They just pull it up, and they tend to pull up at least 5 gallons at a time. They inhale water. So you want enough pressure, enough volume to accommodate a beef animal or a dairy animal when they're thirsty because they drink a lot of water. This is where it's backfilled. So we strategically located each frost-free hydrant to accommodate Brett's system. Now we did protection. We just did a T-post and one ground wire and one live wire here, right? We did that because if you just leave a frost-free hydrant out in a pasture, I'd give it 15 minutes and the cows will go scratch on it and break it. So you always want protection around your hydrants, whether it's going to be on the other side of the fence where they're not grazing, or you have some sort of protection around it. But especially if it's new and shiny and you have cows out there, they're going to wreck it. Okay. So that's why we did that. So you always want protection around the hydrants. We did the same thing at another location. Again, this is electrified T-posts, right? Get them at Tractor Supply. And, this is low tensile, but it's good enough where the cows are going to get a jolt. So all Brett does is hook up the garden hose. He runs the line out. And one thing, a little pointer here, is when you hook up a water line, like a garden hose, and you're going to use it and you're dealing with cattle, spend the money on contractor's hose. All you need is 100 feet. So the idea of 100 feet and all these hydrants is you could move that water trough, the ball water, 100-foot radius. So you could just move it to one side of where you're rotating, then move to the other side. And then I got to find a picture of that. But you spend the money on 100-foot length of contractor's hose and it'll last you a while. So that's the story. I was looking for, another thing I want to talk about are costs. So like for Brett's system, we did 6,606 feet of fence. And the cost back in 2021 through Pro Fence was $28,282.31. That was the cost. So that equated to $4.28 a linear foot installed with corner braces, everything done. We were in and out in 2 days. All right. So Brett, we paid for that, and Brett did a lot of in kind, and he paid for the installation of the water line. So with the state money, the AEM money, he put in probably 25% in kind between cash and his time. So typically around here for 4 strand, it's more than 428 a linear foot, and prices have gone up. With Equip, that's through the NRCS, they have a flat rate. And for installation of high tensile, and that's $2.75 a linear foot installed. Okay, that's a 2023 rate. So they're paying a little more than half, which isn't a bad cost share rate. The high rate the feds would pay would be $3.30 a linear foot, right? That covers a lot of the costs, but that's for a heavy use area, like a barnyard, where the cows are congregating, they're not spread out. So the cost share rate goes up with the concentration of animals in a smaller area. So us district folks, the state funding is a little more flexible. We try to do the estimates on the high end, and the federal programs are fantastic. It's a good way to get conservation on the ground. But we were able to work in Brett's in kind, which would be water line installation, the obstruction removal. He spent a lot of his own money just renting a bulldozer. That was like $1,200 just to do the grading, his own machinery, the fuel between the bulldozer and his mini excavator, was over $600. And he took time off to do a lot of the work. So his in-kind hours added up to a lot. And just look here what I have. Like, this is what we did. This is his system here. So the red is the water line we installed. So the well is near his house, and then he had this water line installed, and then we put in these hydrants. Okay. So that is the water line system, okay, that we did. And again, he did the bulk of the digging. Then he had to go to work and somebody else had to help him. So this is, phone's ringing. Oh, well. So what we have to do is, the paddocks are split, right? So he splits them any which way. So there's perimeter fence all around. Let me find the perimeter fence. So the red is what we did. This is the fence we installed. ProFence did that, right? And we left this one side open because it was on rented land. So he had to work out like a rental agreement with his neighbors. And so he just puts a fence across just to keep it open-ended. But we fenced in all these areas. So he literally splits a lot of these paddocks in half. And with the hydrants, he just moves moves the watering system to the left or right or to the north or south. But again, he's doing a 3 to 4 rotation. He typically does within this acreage 3 rotational cycles per year. And it's really saved him on fuel. Okay, less forage he has to worry about. Herd health is fantastic. He does have a winter feeding area to the north, and he just kind of keeps them confined where they eat and then they exercise. But again, every paddock he uses, he clips at least twice a year. So again, and we've done a lot with soil analysis, looking at pH. Lime's a big one. Lime's inexpensive. And that helps free up soil nutrients, namely phosphorus, okay? And he has added some fertilizer because those fields were neglected. A lot of that his family had a dairy farm and they went out of business in the 80s. So those fields were brought back to life. And the fields that were furthest away from the barn had the lowest phosphorus, and they yielded okay for pasture, but he just gave it a hit of phosphorus just to get them up to par. So there's a lot, we've had a lot of discussions over the years, and his focus is forage quality and having enough. But part of our conversations are, we talked earlier this week, is let the cow, get the fields where you want them to be with phosphorus. That phosphorus is immobile in the soil. The plants uptake it, but he wants to keep his forage stands in good condition. But the thing was, with this acreage here fenced off, it takes about 5 years for the nutrients from the herd to be spread. So he doesn't need to apply fertilizer ever again. It's just training wheels, okay? So it takes 5 years for them to pee and poop in that 30 somewhat acres, okay? 5 years, and you get complete coverage. And rotational grazing really helps with that. You're not allowing cows to congregate in a certain area, or if you have too much of an open area, they get too picky, right? But if you congregate them and make them eat what they need, and as soon as that stand is down to like 4 inches, then you move them. And also it helps spread the nutrients more efficiently and thoroughly. Does anybody have any questions? Is everybody awake?
Thank you, Jake, for this great presentation. We have a question in the chat. Well, first a comment says, "This is a great case study. Thanks for sharing so much detail. Would it be possible to create a document that protects the farmer's privacy, but that lays out the costs and benefits, timeline to implement farmers' costs, including labor and cost share payments?"
I'm reading this. Every document that we do protects the farmer's privacy. Brett agreed to do this with us. Okay. So before we do mention any names or any costs, we have the permission from the farmer. Okay. Again, that's part of AAM. So it's confidential by New York state law. But if a farmer agrees to do a presentation, you're going to know who they are. So we do have farmer permission ahead of time. Would it be possible to create a document that protects the farmer's privacy, lays out the cost? Again, we already received the farmer's permission. But if it's like we've worked with the county with grants, and if we provide a document with cost share rates and what the farmer's putting in, what we're putting in, we take the names off.
Great. I feel like we're small enough. Maybe I could just talk directly. Is that okay?
Go for it.
Sure.
And I apologize. I'm like in the worst part of a massive cold, so I don't sound so good today. But Jake, what I meant was the kind of storytelling that you did today would be really helpful in my own work with farmers to help them understand some climate resilient practices they might want to think about. So when I said a document, I really meant like a case study or just something that either it's digital or it could be published somehow. Just like a 3 or 4 page document that lays out the story that you've told. And then includes, I know them, I think of the costs of this kind and benefits of this kind of a practice as make a sort of an enterprise budget so that farmers could really look at what's it going to cost me, and then down the road, what are the benefits, something like that. Is there any document already like that that's recent for the Hudson Valley? Or would that be something we could talk more about creating from this particular case study, since this farmer's already agreed to have it publicly shared?
Like what we did back in 2021 was very reasonable. And, again, this is what he received, but what he put out was a lot of money too, and
Yep.
time.
Yep.
But with inflation, like if somebody's going to come in our office and say, "Hey, I want to do a rotational grazing system," and they want to do it on with their own money to start with, and then we apply for cost share funding, we literally just go like, "Okay, what do you want to do?" And some people say, "Hey, I have a cedar grove and I have some I mean, literally, this is what happened. So, case study, I have posts, I have 250 posts. Okay, well, you're going to need to buy 12 gauge wire. And we get right on the Tractor Supply site. How much is a 300-foot spool? I mean, the prices do vary. So with inflation lately, the case study is like you have to do a cost estimate, almost every 4 months, right? If you're going with T-posts, metal T-posts, it's all over the place, price-wise. They're expensive, pressure treated. I know people that are going contract, getting loads of locust posts where they are pointed, some of them are blunt. They're getting them from people up in Amsterdam, New York, or wherever they could get them. And then, so there's different, some people have preferences in terms of posts, some people have preferences in terms of fence, some people want 3-wire, some people are insistent on woven wire. It's
Yeah,
all over.
yeah. Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt, but when I'm thinking about an enterprise budget, very typically they will include the ability to change the prices and to adjust, but to your own preference. Um, but what I think would be really helpful is this story of just how it was done, and then literally a list of the costs. And then obviously people would need to update and change it to fit their own situation, but I think that could be really useful. So um,
Yeah.
so
And we
it's
could
it's
do,
not so much about using the case to um, cost the job. It's more about using the case to give people a set of boxes to check as they're thinking about the job. And in my work, I think often farmers are interested before they walk into your office. They're interested to just see overall what they might be getting into. You know, so it's the enterprise budget would be used not for planning purposes necessarily, but more for just teaching people about what putting a system like this it might look like. Anyway,
Yeah,
appreciated the presentation today.
no
yeah,
problem.
and Laura, I think to your point, I haven't seen something specifically like that for the Hudson Valley. It might be out there, but I haven't specifically seen it, and I have seen it for other practices such as cover cropping in central New York. So I think that would be a useful kind of tool and document to have, definitely.
Great. Well, maybe we can, going forward, think about that some more, how we might be able to do that.
Definitely.
Yeah, a lot of times what we do is we have a good idea what it costs per linear foot. Like,
Yeah.
remember I was talking about like, yeah, it costs 446 or 428 a linear foot. And based on inflation, somebody comes in, this is what I want to do. It would cost, there's those conversations. But hiring a fencing company with that linear footage, that was very reasonable 2 years ago. If with inflation, if somebody says, "Hey," again, people walk in the office like last month, they have cedar, what do I do? All right. So that cost for them would be probably, far less, like 220 a linear foot. Okay, them doing the work. That's for cattle. And then once you get into sheep and woven wire, it's a lot more money, like $7 a linear foot. I mean, so it's not one size fits all. It's very specific.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jake, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what the timeline for this project looked like in terms of when the idea was initiated and kind of the planning process and actually implementing, what kind of that process and the timeline looks like.
Is like 2 years. 2 years. So we started planning it. think in 2018. And there's two types of cost share funding we use. So luckily it was our first round of non-competitive. So meaning each farm, up to 2 farms, can get up to $50,000 a piece. So we had $100,000 pot of money to play with. So the cooperators or farmers that work with us with planning, and also based on need, bang for the buck, water quality benefit, soil health benefit, they got prioritized. So from the inception of discussing a rotational grazing system, so the planning took about 6 months, then getting the funding, I would say 2 years from soup to nuts, which is actually pretty quick.
Great,
When
thank you.
we apply for grants, typically it's like between 2 and 3 years from the planning to actually getting money deposited in our bank account, and then design and implementation and reimbursing the farmers. But another thing I have to say is reimbursement's key. So if you want to do a project with the state, once the project's done, you get reimbursed. There's a tax benefit to that. So once you receive public money, the district issues a 1099. So if you're reimbursed for the practice, it's not considered income because the farmer already fronted the money. So there's a tax benefit to them. If we just gave them a check and said, hey, go build some fence, that would be considered income. All right, I'm reading Zach's. I'm looking here. Let me just scroll up. I think, okay, the case study. I think a case study still would be useful at giving people a ballpark idea for one way this transition is made. It's not a prescription, but it gives folks an idea. It really depends on what's in place. If somebody's already grazing, then, and they have a perimeter fence, would it entail expansion to accommodate animal numbers? Would it entail reducing animal numbers where they're spending a lot of time making feed for them? I see that happening with the markets being the way they are. People are overstocked with cattle. They have a hard time getting them processed. But sometimes when people are starting from scratch, but we're working with the farm now that has a perimeter fence, and they sort of rotationally graze. We're doing a covered barnyard, so that'll be part of the transition because they're beating up their winter outdoor feeding area. So I think the next first is get that nutrients, improve soil health by getting the cows on concrete under a roof during the wintertime versus beating up the pasture. And then they could see how their one pasture area benefits, and then improve their grazing system. But again, everybody's different. Am I making any sense?
Yes, yeah, you are. Just understanding that there are, nuances between different systems and different properties and, farmers as well. But I'm not seeing, go ahead, sorry.
It's really, certain farmers just want to adopt, Brett is like the poster person for rotational grazing, where he took it a couple steps further, where in reducing the residence times of cattle and focus heavily on weed suppression without use of herbicides. He's like exceptional with that. And then we're doing a barnyard project. And I think just seeing the benefit of utilizing that manure to improve pasture and hay stands, once that project's done, and once they see, okay, instead of me beating up my pasture, a 10-acre pasture and getting the tractor stuck, I see this pasture has improved, and that would actually change this, their management would change based on success. So some are slow adopters, some are quick adopters.
Awesome. Yes. Well, we've got about 2 minutes left in our time slot today. And I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat for now. But I just wanted to say thank you very much, Jake, and thank you to Travis as well for that awesome presentation today. Very informative and outlined a lot of great information, and the pictures were awesome to, get a good visual as well. So with that, we'll be back here next week, Friday, February 24th at noon, where Laura Langnick, Director of Ag at the Glenwood Center, will be presenting on a practical approach to managing the increased risk caused by more variable weather and extremes. So we hope to see you then.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Jake. Thank you, Jenna.